So today I'm going to do a quick sermon on Philemon. Now, Philemon is an incredibly interesting story because there's a lot of things going on in this little letter, and it's one of the most brilliant things. If you can just wrap your head around this, wrap your head around the whole gospel. So Onesimus is a slave, and he escaped Philemon, and he came to Paul. Thank you, friend, for correcting me that it wasn't Philemon who escaped Onesimus. I really appreciate that because I had a discussion with a person on Quora, which is one of the most beautiful things you can do on the internet, is have these kinds of discussions and refine your arguments with the most brilliant minds around. And we got to the point where we were talking about biblical slavery. And I won't get into all of that because I've done videos on that before. You can watch my video on the 3 tough topics, but this one's specifically about Philemon. And Philemon is a beautiful story because there is some really curious things happening in Philemon. For one thing, it is a perfect example of what the gospel means. And what I mean by this is that Philemon is returned Onesimus, which is unlawful under Jewish law. Under Jewish law, any slave that is escaped from their master, they are to stay with you and are not to be returned, and you are not to oppress them. Now, Paul sends Onesimus back to Philemon. This is a specific, direct violation of the Old Testament commandments, which some might say, well, that's only under Jewish law. Well, no. Jewish law is what the Pharisees were sitting there believing in. So it was a complete contradiction of the Jewish law by Paul, showing that the Jewish law is abolished. Because had we followed the Jewish law, Philemon would not have been returned to Onesimus. But we don't follow the Jewish law anymore. We follow the law of grace. Because I think what Christ understood was that at this time, it was getting too difficult to follow the law, and the temple worship was all destroyed. It wasn't actually working because people couldn't get to the temple. It was made a den of robbers. And the thing of the matter is that Philemon was returned Onesimus. And that right there shows the first point of Philemon, that Philemon returned Onesimus and Paul disobeyed the law in the Old Testament, showing that there's a new covenant, Christ's blood. And what else happened? Paul said he subtly urged Philemon to free Onesimus, which in church history, Onesimus becomes a church leader, he becomes a bishop in church history. So Philemon was subtly urged by Paul to free Onesimus. Not only was Paul urging Philemon to free Onesimus, but also to return and have Onesimus as a brother, to receive him like Paul. So in here we have the second point of Philemon. The first point is that we don't follow the Old Testament law anymore. The second point is that we are to be filled with love. So not only do we break the commandment, not only do we break the Old Testament law, not only do we do that, but we also are to follow through with love, which, as it says in the scripture, there is no sin in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, self-control. There's no sin in any of that. So, and this means, sidetrack here, anytime you're around an LGBTQ person, anytime you're around a gay person or a sinner, there is no sin in kindness. Neither is it if someone does you wrong or someone does something wrong, there is no sin in mercy. There's no sin in being a kind person. As it says in scripture, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Remember that. When you're going around, remember the verses on love, the fruit of the Spirit, the attitudes, you'll do well. So this is the faith, is that we are to be restored to a kind conscience with Christ, that we are to be restored and we are to have love for our neighbor. So Paul restored Onesimus in love to Philemon, and that's the whole gospel. The whole gospel is right there in that little epistle. And it's one of the most remarkable epistles in the whole of the scripture because it is so short and sweet, and it's one of my favorites. Like, it takes you a while to figure it out. I mean, Philemon, when you first read it, you don't get it. It's an honestly goodness, you just wonder, what is this in there for? It's like 1 John and 2 John and 3 John. You're just like, what is this for? But then you read it and you soak it and you start to understand the context. It becomes one of the most beautiful parts. Like, as it says, the least shall be greatest and the greatest shall be least.